mountain that's in front of me will be thrown into the midst of the sea. Through it all, my eyes are on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well. It is well. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and winds still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and winds still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and winds still know His name. The waves and winds still know His name. Sing it as well. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. 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 It is well. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. And through it all, my eyes are on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well with me.
Hello, Kindred Church. I'm so glad that we could be here today. I'm joining you today not from our normal location. I'm recording in the Palomar Mountain area at the Christian Conference Center. This has been a great week at camp. For all those who contributed to that, I'm so glad that you were willing to do that, and I'm glad that we could spend this time together this morning and give you a little picture of this gorgeous weather we're having in this beautiful place. We're continuing in our series on folk tales of faith, and if you see me doing this a little bit today, it's because of all the flies that are out here, but just ignore that. But anyways, as we're thinking about that, and I was thinking about today's psalm. The movie Forrest Gump came to mind. How many have seen that movie? I'm sure at least a good chunk of you have. In that movie, Forrest has had a lifetime friendship with Jenny. Now, there were times when they would go months, sometimes even years without talking, but their friendship was what we would refer to as a covenant friendship, and could weather any storm. There's one scene, both of them are grown at this point. Jenny is trying to put her life back together after a long struggle with addiction and everything that comes along with addiction. And Forrest has offered her a safe place to heal and to put those things back together. But in the scene, they're walking down this dirt road, and they soon come to a shack. And this shack is the place where Jenny had spent the early years of her life. This was the household where she had experienced, though, not happy times, but a lifetime of terrible abuses. So in this moment, she comes face to face with her past, with her pain, with her heartache, and in a lot of ways, she's coming face to face in this moment with what's at the very root of everything that caused all the destruction in her life. Her face, which just a moment earlier was very peaceful and serene as she's talking to her longtime friend, is now contorted, and it's angry, and it's filled with all this hate and bitterness. And then she reaches down and she picks up a rock and flings it towards the shack. And in that, she chips off, some already deteriorating paint. And then she picks up another rock and throws again. And this time it went through a window that was already broken. She picks up and hurls another and another and another, all kind of just with what we would refer to as with reckless abandon. Finally, she falls exhausted to the ground. And Forrest gazes down at her and says, "I guess sometimes there just aren't enough rocks." Those kind of lines are the reason why I love this movie so much. There's always more to what Forrest said than probably what he even really knew. I mean, she could have thrown stones all day, right? All day she could have come back with stone after stone and never destroyed that shack. That's obvious, but not so obvious is the deeper meaning of the scene, that throwing stones all day would never remove and destroy the abuse that had happened in that home, nor would it demolish the effects of everything that would happen. Throwing stones would never bring her torment and her agony, her misery, and her anguish to the ground. And in some ways, maybe in less dramatic ways, but in some ways, we've all been there. Not to the extent of Jenny, or at least I hope not, but we've all had those times where we've thrown these figurative stones, and we're throwing them at situations, at people maybe, at memories, and it's never really relieved the agony. It's never really destroyed the misery or lessened the anguish that's there. It's never eased our torment in any way. So Jenny's question is ours. When throwing stones won't cut it, what do we do? What do we do when there just aren't enough stones? Well, I think the answer is found in the Psalms. It's found in a lot of places in the Bible, but specifically in Psalm 62. At least that's a good starting place for us. In Psalm 62, according to the heading, this was written by David. And as is true with many of his Psalms, David's in a difficult place. He's struggling. He felt like he was tormented by some people who were attacking him. Now, some of those attacks were physical. Many of them were verbal, though, with threats of future violence. But nonetheless, something very difficult was making him feel deeply distressed. And I think a lot of us can connect with that notion, right? Maybe there's something or there's someone who's tormenting you right now. Maybe it's the devil that's doing it. I mean, the devil's an expert at that. Or maybe you're being tormented by yourself. Maybe you're being tormented by your own inner fears and failures. Well, David wrote Psalm 62, and I believe he's trying to help us learn how to manage those kinds of times. This is one of the most practical Psalms, I think, in all the Bible, and it teaches us something that we really must learn in order to take care of ourselves during difficult situations. Let me read that Psalm now. My soul finds rest in God alone. From whom shall my salvation come? God alone is my rock and my deliverance, my citadel, high on the hill. In it I will not be shaken. How long will you attack me, a man all alone? How long will you strive to crush your prey when he's like a leaning fence or a wall on the verge of collapse? Their only purpose is to knock me down from my prominent position, for they love deceit. When others are around, they speak a blessing, but inwardly they're mumbling a curse. Yet my soul quietly waits for the one true God, because I only find hope in the Eternal One. For God alone is my rock and my deliverance, my citadel on a high hill. And while I'm dwelling in God, I will not be shaken. My salvation and my significance depend ultimately on Yahweh. The core of my strength, my shelter, is the Eternal One. Dear people, I have faith in the Lord in all circumstances. Open up your heart to Yahweh, the one true God, who shelters us in their arms. Human beings disappear like a breath, even when they live artificial lives. Their weight is on that of a breath of a balance, and added together, they're still lighter than air. Do not resort to oppression. Resist the temptation of ill-gotten gain. If you achieve wealth, do not let your heart get attached. The one true God spoke this once, and I've heard it twice, that you, the true God, hold all power. For Yahweh, your love never fails. That's a pretty powerful folk song of faith, right? But I really want us to focus on verses 1 and 2 right now. And that part where it says, my soul finds rest in God alone. There's a very special word that's used there for rest, a Hebrew word. It's manua. But the word actually encompasses so much more than just our understanding of rest. It's not just about not working. It involves tranquility. It involves joy. It involves even celebration. David uses this same idea in Psalm 46, verse 10, when he says, be still and know that I am God. And this is the same idea that Jesus communicates when there's this storm that's raging and the disciples are terrified that their boat is about to sink. He says, peace, be still. But how do we find this rest? Well, when we rest, and I mean really rest, we have to calm ourselves down long enough to claim, and in any given situation, that the presence, the promises, and the providence of God are ours in Christ. To illustrate this, there's two great passages in the Bible about this. One is the Old Testament, one is in the New Testament. The first is from Exodus 33. In this story, Moses is being tormented by the challenges of leadership. He's frustrated, he's tired. The Israelites are going through the wilderness, but they're just being difficult. I'm sure you've had people in your life who are just difficult, but Moses is trying to just lead these people through the wilderness, and they are complaining and making mistakes at every turn. He was a bundle of raw nerves. The people are deeply grieved, and Moses feels, in a lot of ways, very alone in his leadership. So in Exodus 33, as God is meeting with Moses, he told God about all the things that were bothering him. And after hearing what Moses said, Yahweh replied in verse 14, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Pretty powerful, right? In the New Testament, Jesus made a very similar point to the disciples as the followers were being tormented and stressed out and very fearful by the imprisonment of John the Baptist from King Herod. They had also just been rejected in Galilee. The disciples, like Moses, were frazzled by the work and the hard-heartedness of the people that they are trying to tell about the Messiah. But in the middle of all this chaos and all this rejection and all this fear, Jesus told them in Matthew 11, verse 28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and are burdened, and I will give you rest." There's that word again, rest. So in the middle of Moses's frustration and loneliness, and in the middle of the disciples' fear and irritability, both times we're told, come to God, come to Jesus, and they will give us rest. These are the only two places in the Bible where that particular phrase, "I will give you rest," are repeated word for word. Yahweh said it to Moses, and Jesus said it to the disciples. And in that, he is essentially saying, by the way, that promise for rest that was given to Moses is there for you too. In fact, it is extended to you through me. So Jesus took it upon himself to repeat verbatim this promise Yahweh gave to Moses. But then he issued it from himself. And in doing so, he's saying that it's only through his authority this divine rest is extended to the followers. And that means you. That means you. The only way that you can have that divine rest of God, that rest for your soul, is through Jesus. And in Psalm 62, back to where we were originally started at, which is situated at the midway point between Exodus and Matthew, David makes this same idea very personal. David makes this divine rest very personal. He says, "My soul finds rest in God alone, from whom my salvation comes. God alone is my rock and my deliverance, my citadel high on a hill. In it I will not be shaken." This is kind of like a banner, right? That when we see ourselves as believers, we need to have this banner flying in our lives. My soul finds rest in God alone. This is the banner that we should begin each and every day with, and this is the truth that we should proclaim as the day comes to an end. But here's the thing. In the remaining verses of the psalm, David is going to teach us how to reinforce and reaffirm this declaration throughout the day. And in that, we're told that there's some people that need to hear this same message if we're going to really be able to implement this in our lives. So first, David tells us that we must find a way to proclaim, "My soul finds rest in God alone," to all the aggravating people in your life. That's a pretty hard one. That we must find a way to proclaim this soul's rest in God to all the aggravating people in our life. David says in verse 3, as he's addressing his adversaries, "How long will you attack me, a man all alone? How long will you strive to crush your prey when he's like a leaning fence or a wall on the verge of collapse? Their only purpose in life is to knock me down from my paramount position, for they love deceit. When others are around, they speak a blessing, but inwardly they are mumbling a curse." So apparently, in this story, in this psalm, there's a group of people who are plotting to undermine the king. They've been saying, "Look, that old dude over there on the throne, he's so weak. All we have to do is give him a little shove, and he's going to be finished," right? But here David is saying, you can't upset me that easily. Not because I'm so strong, but because my soul finds rest in God alone. And Yahweh, because I find rest in God, Yahweh is my rock. Yahweh is my fortress. Yahweh is my strength. There was many years ago, back during the era of the USSR and the Iron Curtain, there was a prominent pastor who was in communist Romania. His name was Josef Son. He had been imprisoned, and later he would be exiled for his faith. And in his short biography, he told of a time when he was arrested and by an officer, and they threatened to kill him. In response, listen to what Joseph said in response to that death threat. "Sir, let me explain how I see this issue. Your supreme weapon is killing." So this is going somewhere, right? "Your supreme weapon is killing. My supreme weapon is dying. Let me explain what I mean, sir. You know that my sermons on tape have spread all over the country. If you kill me, those sermons will be sprinkled with my blood. Everyone will know that I died for preaching what I believe to be true and of God. And everyone who has a tape will pick it up and say, I better listen to what this man preached because he really meant it since he was willing to die for it. So, sir, my sermons will speak 10 times, maybe 100 times louder than before. So for killing me, I thank you." Soon after this conversation is when Joseph was exiled. He continued to preach, and ultimately he was sending sermons back to Romania. But if you listen to the words underneath that statement that he was making to that officer, "My soul has found rest in God alone." You can make all the threats you want. You can threaten my life. That doesn't matter. My soul has found rest in God. And because my soul has found rest in God, even if you take my life, I know that the work of God is going to be even more impactful because of it. Second person that David explains we must proclaim, "My soul finds rest in God alone," is sometimes the most difficult person to ever actually talk to, and the most difficult person to listen, ourselves. Sometimes we have to find a way to proclaim, "My soul finds rest in God," to ourselves. As you read through the psalm, it's easy to see that David is trying to remind himself of this truth. It's almost like he turned to a mirror in this room and he's speaking directly to God himself. In verse 5, he says, "Yet my soul quietly waits for the one true God, because I only find hope in the Eternal One. For God alone is my rock and my deliverance, my citadel and a high hill. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my significance depend ultimately on God. The core of my strength, my shelter, is the Eternal One." So it's clear that David is talking to himself. He repeated to himself almost word for word what he had declared at the beginning of this psalm. The only change is that now he's repeating it in the mirror, probably, whether it was literal or figurative or whatever. But he's repeating this to himself because it's so important to find those special times when we intentionally remind ourselves that allowing our souls to find rest, to find peace in God, those times are so important. We need to find time to calm ourselves down long enough to recognize that in any given situation, we are the recipients of God's promise and the recipients of God's presence. And once we do this, once we have proclaimed this rest to our enemies, once we have proclaimed it to ourselves, we also must find a way to proclaim that my soul finds rest in God alone to everybody else in our lives. David affirmed this in verses 8 through 10. He says, "Trust," this is talking to the group at large, enemies, himself, and everybody else in the room. "Trust in him at all times, you people." That's where we know, okay? "Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts in prayer, for God is our refuge. Human beings disappear like a breath. Even people of rank live artificial lives. Their weight is that of a breath in a balance, nothing. Added together, they're still lighter than air. Do not resort to oppression. Resist the temptation of ill-gotten gain. If you achieve wealth, don't let your heart get too attached. So here David is speaking to all the other people in the room, all those who are listening, and he's affirming what he believes to be paramount, which we see in verse 8. And this is such a powerful little verse. David says that trust in the Lord at all times. I want to do something that might be a little different, and it might go a little fast for you, but maybe instead of trying to take notes, just listen. Listen to these powerful passages from the Bible. I cross-referenced these simple words because they are so useful and awesome in our everyday lives. First, I cross-referenced trust in the Lord or trust in God. I'm just going to kind of shotgun these out there. Chronicles 5:20. They cried out to God, and their prayers were answered because the Lord trusted, or because they trusted in the Lord. Psalm 28. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in Yahweh, and God helps me. Psalm 37. Commit your ways to the Lord. Trust in God, and it will be done. Psalm 40. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in Yahweh. Isaiah 25. This is the Lord in whom we trusted. Let us rejoice and be glad. Nahum 1. The Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. Yahweh cares for those who trust in the Eternal One. Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace. And because you trust in Jesus, may you overflow with hope through the power of the Holy Spirit. And then the last one I found is 1 Peter 2. The one who trusts in the Lord will never be put to shame. That's pretty powerful stuff, right? Trust in the Lord, trust in God. That's paramount in David's eyes. But then he continues at it and says, at all times. So let's look at a few of those. If we're trusting in God at all times, maybe there's other things that we also ought to do at all times. And in doing those, we should share them with other people. Psalm 34 says, I will exult in the Lord at all times. I will praise Yahweh at all times. Psalm 119, my soul is consumed with longing for your laws at all times. Proverbs 17, a friend loves at all times. Romans 1, I remember you in my prayers at all times. 2 Corinthians 9, and God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. And then lastly, in 2 Thessalonians 3:16, may the Lord of peace give you peace at all times, and in every way be remaining in their presence. Which kind of brings us back to this rest, right? This resting in God. Because trusting in the Lord at all times ultimately means that we will find rest for our souls. Trusting in God means resting. And this message of resting in the Lord is something that we are, like I said, we're to share it with all those who frustrate us, maybe even the people that we consider, no, not maybe, definitely the people we consider an enemy. We're also to sell it to ourselves that we must trust God at all times and everyone we come in contact with. And then finally, David says that we must proclaim that my soul finds rest to God in God alone. We're to proclaim that as a prayer to Yahweh. That's what we see happening in the last two verses. David reaffirmed everything that he had said with this in prayer. He writes, the Eternal One spoke this once and twice I've heard it, that you, talking to God, that you, the one true God, hold all power. And in that, Yahweh, I know that your love never fails. You, the one true God, hold all power. And in that, Yahweh, I trust, I find rest. I know that your love never fails. In other words, Yahweh, you're in control. I know that. You exercise all power and authority. You have poured it out onto me. You have poured out your unfailing love. And in that love for me, you're capable of dealing with whatever situation, whatever frustration, whatever fear is tormenting me. I trust that you will be able to deal with it. In you, Yahweh, my soul finds rest. Rest is a powerful word, especially when it's resting in the Lord. I hope that you find time to do that you proclaim it, that you proclaim, my soul finds rest in only you, God. Thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you real soon.
That's